Hey folks, it's Pete from Rail and Manufacturing. I'm here at the HITS conference in Dallas 2016. I'm here with one of the HITS founders, Ted Daus. Ted, would you tell me a little bit about the class that you're going to be teaching?
Yeah, I teach K9 search and seizure legal update. So I keep a pulse on what's going around on the country every year from United States Supreme Court, federal courts, and most of the courts throughout the United States to keep abreast of the do's and don'ts of K9 narcotics search and seizure.
Quick question for you. What gives you the right to be here to teach these things?
Well, unfortunately for most of the people watching this, I do have the dirty word of being called a lawyer. And so I practice law down in South Florida as a drug trafficking prosecutor for the state of Florida for the past 25 years. So doing that exclusively kind of keeps my pulse on the search and seizure, and the Lord has shifted me into the canine world of keeping a pulse on dogs and how dog works and how dogs are deployed. So I kind of keep, that's my niche, let's say, in the market.
One of the things that being a dog handler myself and working with prosecutors is that it's really difficult for them to understand the legalese of the canine world. Can you tell me what the importance is of the handler talking to any kind of prosecutor or attorney about a case?
Well, sure. The most important part of winning a case, whether it's a motion to suppress or your basic testimony, and I know some of the viewers are going to raise their eyebrows at this type of thing, is meeting with your prosecutor at some point in time for an hour or two before your hearing or your motion or whenever you're going to court, because as they say in the real world, practice makes perfect. The canine handler could educate the prosecutor a little bit about what they are doing and what the terminology is, and then the prosecutor then with that knowledge can ask the right questions and get them to the right point to legally sell to the judge of their legal point or make a better presentation to the jury. So getting them the synergy of learning the terminology or teaching the prosecutor, and the synergy really works well in court if they get that done. You can't do it 15 minutes in the hallway and say, gee, I know I've done a killer time, let's go. But I know sometimes that's not practical, so sometimes that is what you have. But if both sides can make a little better effort, you'll get together and make better testimony.
Now, you were talking about keeping your finger on the pulse and staying with the most updated. We've recently, in the last couple of years, even in the last couple of months, had some pretty interesting case law come down. You talk about those cases?
Sure. Two out of Florida, which I participated in a team of lawyers with the Attorney General's office and some fine lawyers out of Washington, D.C. on Florida versus Harris and Florida versus Jardines. I call them in a quick note. Jardines was a case about dogs sniffing houses, and unfortunately in a 5-4 very close vote before the United States Supreme Court, they determined that dogs randomly sniffing houses without warrants is something that they don't want, so we lost that 5-4. So now if you're sniffing a house, you got to have a warrant to do it. That was a few years ago. And then Harris, which I think is a huge victory, that was a 9-0 vote. And that was a reversal of the Florida Supreme Court. So saying that basically dog reliability, the old term you and I kind of grew up with, the old false alert term, is kind of a really stale or out of date term since Harris, because the court recognized that really dogs are just odor dogs. They're not tangible dope dogs, and there are reasons why your dog may alert to odor, but you find no tangible dope, and they recognize that that's not a false or a wrong or an error if that were to happen. And they voted 9-0 that dogs are reliable as long as they're well trained, maintained, and the preference around the country is to be certified once a year by an independent agency. So those were two huge cases in the past couple of years. And of course there's one last year. Right. Yeah, the most recent one was Rodriguez. A little turmoil around the country with Rodriguez. We're really seeing 1/3 of the nation is kind of doing A, 1/3 of the nation's kind of doing B, and I'll explain what those are. And then C hasn't really tackled the issue yet. So Rodriguez is coming out about if you're the dog handler and you're the stopping officer, making say a traffic stop and you're the dog handler, and continuously writing the ticket or in the process of issuing the ticket versus stopping that process and running your dog, let's say, and then some courts are saying, well, if you're the officer that stops that ticket process, you've delayed or prolonged that process, and that's a violation. Other courts are saying, well, the driver would already be there for 10, 12 minutes anyway on the ticket, and if you run your dog at the 3 or 4 or 5 minute mark, the driver would be there anyway. So you're not prolonging or adding to the stop of the driver because you're not adding any more time. So Rodriguez is really cutting 50% for dog and cop and 50% for driver and defense attorney. So there's a little turmoil there, and my guesstimate will be, in the next 3 or 4 years, the United States Supreme Court will have to jump in and say, this is what Rodriguez was intended to do, and they'll settle that conflict, but it just takes time to do that.
That was on a case with no other specific articulable facts to delay it for any other?
Yeah, Rodriguez's nutshell version was a 20-minute traffic stop. And somewhere around the 12, 13, 14-minute mark, the canine handler decided, I want to be able to run my dog. But he was the only officer on scene. So at that point in time, he called for backup. In the next 7 or 8 minutes, he finished writing the ticket around the 20-minute mark. No backup officer arrived. He said, well, for safety purposes, I'm still going to wait for my backup. But the ticket had been finished at the 20-minute mark. So another 7 to 8 minutes went by, the backup officer arrived. He could safely then deploy his dog and do an exterior sniff of the vehicle and got an alert. Now they said that extra 7 to 8 minutes, from 21 to 28 was a no extension. But they actually did say in the case, had the dog been deployed prior to the finishing of the ticket at the 20-minute mark and got an alert, that would have been okay. So the scenario is, are you or somebody in the process of still writing that ticket while the dog's being deployed? If you just go back to what we were doing 10 years ago, we'll all be good. Somebody's putting pen to paper, somebody's on the radio, somebody's processing everything that needs to be done at the traffic stop while the dog's being run. It can't be, if you're in one of those, let's say, anti or pro-Rodriguez defense jurisdictions, it can't be, I'm writing ticket, I'm taking a timeout to run the dog with no ticket being processed or looked into, and then getting an alert. Somebody, the backup officer, another officer, somewhere, yourself or somebody processing that ticket while the dog's being done, get you out of that Rodriguez problem.
I can see some rural agencies where your closest coverage is a long distance away, where this is going to pose a problem, whereas in a more metropolitan area, probably not that big of a deal.
Sure, yeah, there's two real ways to avoid a Rodriguez issue, as I call it, is one, your backup officer gets there. I call it the old football handoff. Right. You're writing the ticket for 2 or 3 minutes, your backup gets there, you hand it off to the backup, he or she keeps writing the ticket, you deploy the dog, you're golden. If you're in a big, multiple metropolitan area and your dog is being deployed, you want to deploy a dog, you could actually call a second handler out. The first handler could still write the ticket, just play the role of traffic cop. Your second dog arrives in 5 minutes or so, and they just deploy the dog, and the ticket's always being written. So it's really a focus on that. But you're right, if you're let's say a Wyoming handler, and you're the only dog guy and your backup's 20 minutes away, there is a little bit of geographic considerations going on in some of those courts because they realize there are some issues there, but predominantly you do have a time consideration versus rural versus metropolitan, so that could be an issue.
I definitely see that getting played out in the future.
Sure.
What are the classes you're teaching here at HITS?
Well, I'm teaching Canine Search and Seizure Legal Update, and Andy Wyman and myself both go on the road, and we are available to do lectures around the country for agencies. And what we do is we do an 8-hour seminar on that day. We kind of combine what we do here in his class in 2 hours and my class in 2 hours, but we do a more expansive lecture on that. We slow the process down, kind of go through a little more facts and circumstances. Andy does the police officer side with the record keeping. I do more of the prosecutor side of the legal update, but really walk through step by step some of the cases I don't get to do here. And we're going to be, as you know, out in your fabulous state of California, Carlsbad, California, and Yakima, Washington later on this year. So we travel all around the country, and you can do that.
And if a handler or an agency wanted to get a hold of you to set up one of these courses, how would they do so? Yeah,
well, you can go to our HITS website, which is www.hits9.net. And I'm Ted at hitscanine.net, and he's Andy at hitscanine.net. So either one of those, you can send us an email and tell us you're interested. We'll work with you on price. We know that if you're in a huge agency, you may be able to cut a check without a problem. If you're in a small rural area, we'll work with you because we really like getting out and working with the cops and educating and getting the word out.
Thanks, Ted. Always a pleasure talking to you.
And thanks for Ray Allen for being a part of HITS, buddy.
Anytime. Thank you very much.